Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Cosmic Corner on Faith Unaltered. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome content. I'm joined tonight by four awesome guests, one of whom is a brand new face, one of whom is a friend who's come back from obviously a desert place. We got Dale with us.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's Egypt. That's the pyramids in the background.
that is the pyramids. I didn't even notice. I was trying to see your face.
Yeah,
That's
that's
fantastic. That's so cool that you're well traveled, dude. Like I literally don't go anywhere more than 45 minutes from my house, so I'm super jealous.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I just did my my bucket list. I went for it all around the Roman world and stuff is what I cared about. So yeah.
that's incredible, man. And joining us also is Travis Worth. He's back again. I'm excited to see you back, bud. It's been a couple of months, but
Yeah,
welcome.
I haven't really been in the YouTube world very much lately. Honestly, I've just been doing like a ton of reading. From the last time I was on here till now, I've just been reading. So that's what I've been up to.
I would not consider that a bad thing. That's probably for the best, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the internet is a greater place than a book.
I just love
um,
reading, and I have a passion for theology and philosophy. I love it. So.
right on. Well, I'm glad to have you, man. Joining us again is Spencer.
Hello.
Our how you doing, bud?
Good. Yeah. Today
Right on.
has been interesting because out here in Colorado where I live, we just got like dumped on with like literally like 20 inches of snow. So yeah,
Oh
we've
wow.
had enormous amount of snow all around.
Well, where I live, we don't get any inches of snow, so I'm mystified by that, to be honest with you. Every time people send me pictures of snow just piling up, and then the next morning they come out, and it's like, how? Yeah, rain
I
doesn't do
know.
that, man. You know, like you leave rain alone and it goes away, and snow just seems to kind of hang out for a long while. It's a trip.
Well, I'm in
Um,
Texas. I'm jealous of all the snow. We don't ever get any.
Yeah, same here.
well, we get snow in California, but nowhere near where I live. I'm right outside of San Francisco, and the closest place we get is the mountaintops, and it's not even a foot thick. It's not even a couple inches thick. It's
I'll
like
just,
Well,
more like frost on the ground.
I'll just say
I
I'm in
grew
Canada. I'm supposed to get snow, and we got nothing in winter. Like
Wow.
I grew up in the Midwest, and out there, like the snow just lingers. It gets like it's just gray and cold like the whole winter long, and you get like snow that then melts only a little bit and then freezes, and then you get snow on top of it, and then that and snow on top of
Wow.
that. It just like packs on. And out here in Colorado, it's like because I don't know, I think it has a lot to do with the altitude and radiant heat and how close to the sun it is, but man, it like once it hits, it gets on there, like it's gone really soon. I mean, like I said, we've had 20 inches over the last 2 days, and that's well over 3/4 gone by now, and the roads are pretty much clean. So
That's crazy. Yeah, I
yeah.
can't even imagine. I'll have to plan do a Dale move and just go to all the places that I'm jealous of. I'll have to go around the world and try to see things.
Yeah.
I've never really had I guess the resource, but also I guess not necessarily the immediate drive either, just kind of hop and go. But it's hard to do that with a family, so this will be a definite planning
Yeah.
ahead thing. But we have a brand new face tonight. Well, not brand new entirely to me because he's been on CSG with me, but brand new to Faith Unaltered. What's going on, Chase? You're from Texas also, right? You're muted, bud. Oh, uh-oh. Hold on. I think
Yeah.
maybe it's an allowance thing on your browser. You might have to allow the audio.
Yeah.
Okay, while he's fixing that, I'll give a small intro. Chase is a good friend from Facebook. I've had him on before I even had the Cosmic Corner thing. When I was still doing CSG only and co-hosting for Faith Unaltered, we talked about a couple of things, namely storytelling. Chase is an author. He writes fiction novels, series of fiction novels that are actually Christian based, and they're really enticing, to be honest with you, and so you should check that out. If I can manage to remember afterward, I'll try to put a link in the description to in Amazon for Chase's book.
Can you hear me?
Get that in. Yes, I can hear you now.
All right, there we go.
Right on. Welcome, bud.
I have to interrupt there for a moment because I've unpublished the book right now because I got to do some reworking on it. So yeah, I finally got an editor, and I told her to take a look at the first book, and
nice.
She just told me, hey, there's a few things here, and then I just went back and I was like, you know what, I feel like the story could be stronger if I did a few more things, and so right now it's back in the shop, Okay. So but it's coming along pretty good, So I'm very excited with where it's going. I think it's going to be a much stronger story now as a result. So I will let you know when it's back up and published. But
okay.
I
won't put a link in the description. But everybody keep on a lookout and keep his name under your pillow so you can look it up later.
Right. I was actually going to say before I realized I had some mic issues, I was checking when you guys talking about weather. I'm especially up in Colorado. It's trippy for me because I'm looking at the weather here in San Antonio, Texas. 75 degrees and the humidity is just awful right now, and we're in stormy weather, and it's just I'm outside and I'm sweating and everything like that. It's just so weird to think about how the weather is just so different, in just different parts of the country and stuff. So
yeah,
but yeah,
America's pretty huge, or so is Canada for that matter.
Yeah, Texas is big. Yeah, Texas is huge too. I've driven out to Utah, out of Texas a couple of times. Getting out of Texas is the worst. It's just, I feel like, like I'm in some kind of purgatory or something like that, because it's just hours and hours of just nothing for just miles and miles and miles. And then you get out of Texas and now you're in New Mexico. It's like 2 hours and you're already in Colorado. In Colorado, it's like 2 hours and boom, I'm in Utah. It's just getting out of Texas is the worst part, But yeah.
I have a similar feeling about California, but depends on which direction you're going.
Right. South to north, north to south, maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
Kinda.
Exactly. But so, all right. So tonight, what we're going to be talking about is a bit of a change of pace from the last few episodes. If anybody's been that's here, I know Prudence McFrugal, which is an awesome name. They're a frequent in our chat. They've been watching the last few episodes and they've been in the chat. So I know that they're knowing what I'm talking about. The last few episodes that we've had were more focused on particular narrative themes and how they could be interpreted as things that are relevant not only to the faith, but also in a practical sense, something that you can understand reality through the lens of story, like most people, if not all people, would do so. In the case of, let's say, just the simplest things like a plan or a memory, let's say setting a task for yourself and things like that, kind of just live in the framework of a story. So it's intuitive to kind of think about things that way. But tonight we're going to change the pace a little bit and we're going to talk about something a little more abstract. Maybe not more abstract, but a little bit less ground floor practical and a little bit more I don't know, I want to call it abstract. We're going to be talking about language. And to be honest with you, language is a really strange thing because language is something that allows me to get what's in here into you and what's in you into me. And that's something that I think that as humans, but also as modern people who are just absolutely drowning in language-based everything, we kind of just take for granted that that's what's happening, that I can share the contents of my mind with you and that you can share the contents of your mind with me and that I can understand it to some really very articulate and exact and accurate way. Sometimes some people are really, really good with words and you can understand almost exactly what it was they were thinking when they articulated it. And this is something that a lot of people, it draws out of them an admiration when they read a good author and they see this person said that exactly. Man, I couldn't have put that in a better way. That was great. And then you just get it, right? So there's this sharing, and it's the space of, like you're sharing this kind of mental space or idea space where you're able to share these things. But it's not always the case that in order to share what's in me in you, or what's in you into me, that we even need a verbal language, right? Sometimes we communicate without a word. A lot of this has become rather cliche, and it's often used as a trope in, let's say, romance movies and things like that, where you get a side glance and the glimmering eye, or you get the smirk from the three-quarter space, or you can see the flashing of a smile, or the movement of the body when it gets uncomfortable, or something like that. And there's much about you and
We're not
what's
doing
in.
Carrie's suggestion here of going into love languages, are we? Or I'm just
I,
curious.
I, we might, I don't know. It depends on kind of how this flows out. We might actually get somewhere like that,
Okay.
because that's relevant to communicating with one another without language necessarily. So, well, not without language, but without verbiage sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I was just
Especially being someone who's married, I can tell you a lot of what me and my wife say to one another isn't out loud.
okay. Fair enough.
And so that, yeah, it's one of those instances where you kind of see that words help, but they're not always the help that we want them to be, and sometimes
Right.
there just isn't words for what you're trying to say. And so saying isn't the answer, especially if
Yeah.
somebody who's really verbal. I talk a lot. Obviously, you guys are hearing me do it, and you come back for more for whatever reason. You gluttons for punishment. And as I'm talking, I'm thinking in real time, and I'm trying to communicate where I am to you, right? And so there's something that really language is not necessarily replaceable by anything, but it's not always the right tool for the right job, if that makes sense. And so I kind of want to explore what we can find out about those languages that are more universal than verbal language. Because if I'm honest, 80+% of the planet I don't even have access to, because the people there do not speak English, and I don't speak any other language fluently. I understand some Spanish, but I don't really speak it conversationally very well. And if I met somebody who only spoke Spanish, I would have a hard time communicating what's in here to where they are, right? I'd have to find some other means of communication. And thank God, because we share the image, we share more than just verbal language. And I can communicate with you in some real functional sense without verbiage a lot of the time. And so kind of want to explore that side of things. And so one of the first examples that happened to come up here was love languages. And that's something that when I was talking to these gentlemen in the side chat before we began, it is something that I would encapsulate in the affections, let's say. And affections aren't necessarily just love languages. They're also the first means of communication you ever encounter. When you're born, you need to communicate with the mother, right? And the mother needs to communicate with you. And the first means by which a baby communicates with the mother is actually not verbal in the sense that it's words. It's verbal in the sense that it's an outcry, or a breathing pattern, or a small cooing sound, or something like that, or even the chemical exchanges from their bodies, in which the baby exhumes certain smells, or the mom exhumes certain smells, and the baby recognizes the mother, it recognizes the mother's milk, and things like that. There's a communication happening long before anything like verbal recognition is possible. And so with that, I think that actually like the starting place, or the root, let's say, of those kind of affections that we can share without language. What do you guys think?
Well, as a counselor, as a psychology person, yeah, I can absolutely confirm everything you're saying about that. What we would call like pre-verbal language, where there's a lot of that back and forth. And actually, what we do know about attachment theory tells us that the result of that kind of communication, of that dialogue, literally between like a mother and a child, or between any kind of caregiver and child, is the most salient, the most powerful, the most like deeply rooted in terms of personality. That a lot of the later development of a person happens in those first 5 years.
Well, I think that's important too, because those formative years are going to be things that they're going to be things that develop all of the things, like you said, not only a personality, but also
Mhm.
the outward characteristics of how that personality is going to manifest with people and how you find that appropriate or inappropriate. But also, like your biological drives, some of them, the way that you have your eating patterns or your sleeping patterns, or the way you learn to be organized or disorganized, or perhaps your vocal inflections and your willingness to be aggressive or submissive and things like that. A lot of that stuff is informed in those first few years very, very deeply. And that's why, it's not really once you start thinking about it that way, it's not really a wonder why some people who are, when they're very small children, are either neglected or abused in some capacity, end up being mostly nonverbal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for a very, very small child, I mean, obviously, like their prefrontal cortex is barely developed. It's their language skills are almost non-existent, and so what their primary developmental task at that age is to kind of assess for safety. Um, uh, it it can I get the basic needs met, for survival, and then above that is security. Like, do I belong? Am I accepted? Do my caregivers pay attention to me? Is there affection? Do they love me? Essentially. And again, this is all like done in pre-verbal, pre-cognitive ways. And so all of that encoding from the developmental uh, state, from the developmental standpoint, all of that encoding is happening in deeper brain structures, so like in the limbic system and in the hindbrain. And so all of those kind of response patterns to the world around me are developed at a very, very early age. And so, for example, if a person feels like they grew up in an environment where they have very little safety and security, or there's disorganized safety and security stimuli, like sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, then what happens is they develop these kind of deep brain structure patterns of hypervigilance, of like, I have to be on alert at all times because I can't trust that that the environment that I live in is safe, is secure, and so I have to constantly be scanning for safety and security, or I have to create it through extreme means because I can't count on other people to be able to create it for me. And so all of that is like, I mean, you want to talk about universal language, like that is very, very much a universal language, is like, a mother and child, cooing to each other, or even from the very, very beginning. I remember when my daughter was born, like they talked to us in the birthing classes about how important it was to have that skin to skin contact between in the
Right.
first few minutes, and how critical that was for the brain to develop. Because once that happens, literally the baby's brain starts to change materially. Because obviously this is not like a cognitive change, because they don't have cognition, or at least not in any sense that we recognize it. But the baby's brain creates neuronal connections in those first literally moments of life. So
Yeah, I just think the interesting thing about language that came up to me is I always think of like intelligent design, and like John Lennox's example, like if you see something in the sand, like a bunch of marks, Sally loves John or John loves Sally. There's that semiotic dimension, right, whereby all languages have that. We can connect concepts to specific languages, either verbal expression or written, or there's sign language, stuff like that. So I think that semiotic dimension is really unique to humans.
Yeah.
And it even goes pre-language, as Spencer's saying. Like for example, babies have concepts. They know basic mathematical truths. There have been scientific studies where they try to test, like they'll put like a doll up, a couple two times, right, and then they'll put it down, then they'll put it up 2 times again. The baby grows accustomed, and then they'll put it up 3 times, and the baby's like, "Whoa, what? That was wrong. No, that's it's not right."
Yeah.
Right? So they have these concepts even before they have language to express it. So I think that points to the design. We are intelligently designed by God with certain concepts that make us unique to other animals and stuff.
Yeah, I really like kind of what Dell was saying too. Like with language, it has this idea of manifesting intentionality. Like there's an intention, there's reasoning, and it's a way of expressing that. And we see that in so many different, the philosophy of language is huge. I mean, we see this in like artistic expression, artwork, even things like tragic art representing, the beautiful triumph over tragedy. And there's so much intentionality that can be communicated non-verbally. It's like, I think it is. It's very interesting. Yeah.
I think it would be, and just to give the space for it, I think it would be really interesting to kind of reverse engineer this, because I know, as somebody who I as my tag name says there, I'm the storyteller. I tell stories to my children, and like all the time, it's one of my favorite things to do. And I love story, and I honestly believe it's one of those crazy superpowers. You know what I mean? Like I really do believe that. And I know, Chase, you're a storyteller also, obviously being an author. It's like there are some times where what you're trying to do as a storyteller seems like an impossible task, because you're trying to take something that isn't universal, which is the experience of being an embodied creature in a story, and then translate that into language sufficiently so that the next person can gather what it is that you have. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a weird and difficult task in general. But then there's like I was saying before, there are just times when some authors really do it right. You know what I mean? And there are times and I remember the last conversation that you and I had, Chase, was the difference between showing and telling. That really impacted me when you mentioned that. Is there something that stands out to you, in terms of what we were just talking about, that you would say, this is something that I use when I'm trying to translate that picture or that mental, that the avatar I've created in my mind that's going to act out such and such or experience such and such? I need to translate that back into articulate language so that I can give it to you. How do you even do that?
Well, the best way for me to describe it is kind of like you were just talking about, showing and not telling. And so one of the things, like, I'm not a counselor either at all, but I'm always fascinated with psychology, and what Spencer was talking about, I was like really into that. Like that was really, really fascinating thing to listen to. But like, because especially right now, it's like I just told you guys, I'm reworking a lot of things in the first book. I've learned a lot about trauma and the effects of trauma on a person and stuff, and I've been trying to incorporate that a lot into the story. And so rather than trying to tell you such and such character is traumatized by this, I show it through the way they respond to certain things. So there's a scene that I started working on in chapter 3 in this book. The main character, she goes to this place where she endured a lot of trauma, but she hadn't been to it in years. And so when she went to the place, she didn't expect the things to happen there that happened. Like she was found in this cave, and that cave kind of symbolizes a form of just hopelessness to her, because she was kind of trapped there. And so she just was traumatized by what happened there. And so when she saw the cave again, I have the scene to where it's like the cave appears as though it's like this monstrous mouth thing, like it's just like wants to swallow her whole, basically it's just this pit of darkness kind of thing. But just basically to try and show how a person reacts to certain things, rather than, and that's the thing I've been, another one of the elements that I got really into was the body language of somebody, like that how body language shows what's going on in their mind, how they, just the little tiny ways they react to something, even just the very subtle things or whatever they might be. So, when I'd write my books and stuff, I would try to, instead of just telling you what is going on, I try to express it with the character and the way they react to this, that, the other thing. So that's really kind of, I guess the best way for me to describe it, to that communicating something, whether the person is saying it very obviously or not, but they're communicating something through the way that they behave and they act. I also wanted to just note too, I was thinking the whole time as you guys were discussing, my nephew, he's 3 years old. He turned 3 years old in December. And it's been such an incredible thing watching him grow up, because like I was thinking about this the other day. Actually, it's kind of interesting. I was thinking about the other day. He's forming words now. You know, words for things that he sees, but it's like I was like, he knows the thing already. He just then the words come. He knows what it is first, and then we just teach him how to say what it is, like a spoon or something like that. You know, like the words are just the verbal words, but like the thing itself, you know. Like it's kind of like one of those things. Like I don't know if it's totally accurate, but it's like what came first, chicken or the egg, kind of thing, sort of thing like that. But like he learns, he understands the
answer
color.
is yes.
Yes. Yeah, he understands like the color green already. We just tell him what that's how to say it, you know?
And it's expressing that intentionality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking about, you know, was as you guys were talking, you know, about my nephew and just the fascinating things of watching him grow up, you know, and things like that.
That's one thing I wanted to mention this in my opening speech, not because it's not just about mathematics, but with babies. A thing that blew me away when I first found out about it is like babies actually have a sense of right and wrong and morality and stuff. If you don't mind, Josh, I can play like a 2-minute video clip of like an experiment that was done, and this pre-language, right? So I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I'm cool with that.
All right. It's just 2 minutes or so. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
I can see it.
Okay.
In another of our tests is a character who has a ball, and he plays with his ball sort of happily, and then he drops his ball to one side of the stage or another. At the back of the stage, there are 2 characters, one of whom runs up when the ball goes over near him, grabs the ball, and gives the ball back to the character who dropped it. On the other hand, the character on the other side of the stage, when he runs up, he grabs the ball and runs off stage with it. So we are just going to have her choose between the puppets now.
Hey, which one do you like? That guy? Okay.
All right, that was the nice guy.
I heard about the concept and I thought it was a really neat idea.
We just like to participate in baby science.
The girls really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
To improve our chances of becoming better parents.
In another scenario, we show infants a character who tries but fails to open a box. Okay, gorgeous one. Up goes the curtain. One character comes and helps him open the box after he struggles. And down goes the curtain. Up goes the curtain. Another character comes and jumps down on top of the box, preventing him from doing so. Okay, great. Now we're just going to have her choose between the puppets.
Which one do you like? That one?
So parents often ask us what it might mean that their baby seems to tell the difference between a nice guy and a mean guy.
That's the only question I would really have is, how did my baby do?
And one of the things I think it means is that we spend a lot of time worrying about teaching children the difference between good guys and bad guys in the world, good things and bad things. But that in fact, these things might be something that infants just come to the world with.
So yeah, that's kind of the point that I just wanted to say there. And I found that interesting. I was kind of blown away when I first found out about that.
Yeah, that was great. I love that the entire experiment is framed as a story.
That's what I was thinking too.
Little tiny miniature narratives that the baby can inhabit with the characters in order to have an identity with them, because otherwise they have no meaning. They need that identity, and all like Chase said, all they need afterward is the phonetic sounds to give a label for the identity that they already have for the thing. And so all of this is actually building blocks that are more surrounded by intuition than anything, I think, because all of that stuff comes down to being embodied. The baby is embodied, right? And so it understands all the different motions, all the different things, trying to move a ball around, trying to open a box. These are action oriented, but they're also goal oriented, right?
Yeah,
you want
teleological.
You want to play with the ball. And so there's a goal orientation, which requires some step of understanding the reasoning process. I have the ball. I have the procedure of closing my hands around the ball, doing all these things. I drop the ball. Oh no, new procedure, right? For a baby, that's a huge deal. for an adult, that's simple. I mean, it might be frustrating because your backstory, you got to pick the thing up, but like really, it's easy. You just close your hand around the thing, job done. The baby, I don't know if you guys notice, or I'm sure Chase, you're all too aware of this, and I know Spencer has kids. I don't know if you have kids, Travis, but when you have a baby, they're brand new. These are more like clubs on the end of sticks. They're not hands yet. They know what they're doing. You know what I mean? They gotta piece this whole thing together little by little. And so it's very cool to see how quickly the moral intuition even is, because it's developed in the framework of a story, but it's developed really rapidly, apparently.
You know, I think stories and you know are just part of the concept of mind. You know, because it's like, you know, I think, you know, I even look at it metaphysically. Like, as a matter of fact, Dell and I were recently in a debate on the existence of God. And as I was going over, part of the problem of evil, I think, is that, you know, I think fundamental reality, like, let's say it's undergirded with fundamental mind. And so, you know, that we're like in a great story, a narrative, you know, a story of eventual triumph over tragedy. And, you know, there are these different characters who have plots and then subplots and everything. I think, you know, it just undergirds reality. You know, like, I think this is really, you know, like heavy metaphysical stuff. Like, well, it has so many layers.
For me, just to bring it down from the metaphysical to the practical, there's a type of therapy called narrative therapy or logotherapy that I utilize sometimes with my clients, where we talk about like what kind of story are you in, what role do you play in your life story, and we start you know working with them to try to kind of rewrite their life story, and that becomes a therapeutic healing process for them to be able to, you know, like either create like a tree that to where they can start to conceptualize things a little bit differently, and they start to see, you know, okay, this is this traumatic event that happened to me. How can I turn it from pardon the French, but like crap into fertilizer, and doing those kind of like that sort of cognitive reframing is all done in the context of story. And then even with, because there was a period of time where I worked in an elementary school as an elementary school counselor, and one of the things I would do there is a lot of what's called like play therapy, where you know, because a lot of these kids either are, you know, pre-verbal or non-verbal, or their verbal skills are kind of sketchy and, you know, not really reliable, or at least not propositionally reliable. And so what we have to do is we have to like act out a scene, you know, play a story essentially. Like, okay, so here comes this figure. Now, what does this figure do next? And then they get to, like, you know, step in and take over and create, you know, a scene that describes their experience or describes their internal emotional world in a way that is very rich, but just is not super propositional. So like that story element is real, not just on the metaphysical level.
Well, I think it's in all aspects. It's in the practical, and it goes up because you see these story elements. I think they're just fundamentally part of reality, because that's what you see from the practical all the way up to the metaphysical. You see these story elements. You know, we're like characters. You know, we have plots and subplots, and, you know, we're forming goals all the way from the very practical of the infants to, you know, that's kind of like our journey. It's like, you know, and I really like that it shows the intentionality behind agents. So yeah.
Oh, do you guys think that when because I have a question here in the side chat. I don't know if that was included in the video that you provided, Dale, if that was something for earlier or later in the video. Did all of the babies in the experiment react the same way, or was it like a percentage kind of thing? I don't know if Spencer, you can speak to any statistical value on that, but I think that's a relevant question, because it's kind of how universal is the intuition at work there,
right?
Yep.
Well, yeah. Go ahead, Dale. Go ahead.
Because I was just gonna say, from my memory, I remember they were saying when we first saw that video in class that it was universal. That all babies did that. I don't have a citation for the study, so maybe Spencer knows more about that.
I'm not aware off the top of my head of that specific intervention or that specific experiment, but I do know that in general, a lot of scientific research is conducted in percentages, and very, 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 very few of them are 100%. And usually when that happens, they go, something's wrong. So there's usually what's called a bell curve of normal, and they're looking for something, within a couple of standard deviations on either side are the outliers, and then you've got like 85% of in the window of that. If it happens in that window, we can say with a significant degree of scientific certainty, or at least not certainty, but scientific accuracy, that the effect is the result of the cause. So
Interesting. Okay, fair enough. To move on a little bit from infants, let's say as adults with a little bit more formed articulation, do you guys think that it's the case? I know that we brought this up, I think it was before we even went live. We had brought up the 4 P's of knowing from John Vervaeke. If anybody listening to this hasn't looked that up, take time after this to check out the 4 P's, the 4 knowings, the 4 forms of knowing, by John Vervaeke, just to get more of a backdrop on that, because it's really, really in depth. Sorry, Dale.
Josh, just to interrupt. So I just looked it up right now. So Brian, the answer to your question is that with the experiments, more than 80% of the babies in the study showed their preference for the good bunny.
Yeah.
Whereas with 3-month-olds or higher, the number went even higher to 87% of the babies.
Wow.
Yes. There's there's that standard deviation window there. Yeah. So usually 80% is considered to be a statistically significant result. Yeah.
That's actually, I mean, I don't want to say it's surprising, but it's kind of gratifying to hear that as they develop, it increases. You know what I mean? I feel like that's the basis for thinking that it's actually a learning process rather than just, something that doesn't have any basis in reasoning at all, because really the child is doing some form of reasoning in doing so, but it's not articulate propositional reasoning. They're not thinking mean guy equals hurt me equals don't like, right? Like none of that has to be in any way articulated in that way. They just kind of go from one phase to another intuitively in the story itself, if that makes sense, because like they did it with the puppets. It's a play, it is a narrative, and that's why it's so intuitive, is because I think that's what story ultimately is the human piece of communication. And I think that's why when the God of the universe chose to make a revelation about himself to his creatures, he did it in the form of something that's roughly 80+% narrative itself, which is our scripture. Our scripture is primarily, by a long stretch, primarily narrative. Exactly. And it is through that we intuit and we understand, even in our articulated sense, understand who and what God is and what he does, how he is, his character, his trustworthiness. Like Spencer was pointing out, trust is expensive, and we can learn this very early on, and we learn it from those people who are, let's say, symbolically or perspectively in the position of being like a giant or a god. It's those parents that you have when you're absolutely vulnerable and helpless. They are above you, and they from above provide and protect. That's what they are meant to do, and the baby is simply submitting to that. What else are they going to do? They have nothing else they can do. They can protest by crying if they don't get what they want immediately, but they're still ultimately in a state of complete reliance, right? And so God calls himself Father, I think, for a really great reason, because that in doing so kind of bypasses that need for a propositional understanding about God and brings it right back down into the narrative space with us, so that we can in fact map that onto something that makes more sense than most theological propositions do to most people, right? As somebody who loves theology, I love being able to articulate something. I really, really do. But oftentimes, if I want to explain to somebody who God is to me, the word Father is exactly right, right? The word Lord is exactly right. Another relational term in a narrative. When Christ calls his disciples not simply slaves or servants, but friends, boy, that's one heck of a statement there. Hebrews says that we're his brethren. family, even that we share as children of God, an identity with him in some sense. That's one heck of a statement, right? And so it's not like you'll ever really articulately get to the bottom of that. There's so much about it that has a meaning that words don't really get to make a cage for, I think. And
Josh.
so yeah.
Oh no, I was going to say with what you were saying right there. Would you say that you know, when it comes to God and this concept of story, that we could sort of map that onto like mind? That you know, telling stories and the story narrative, it's recognizes is basically the product of mind, like not just God, the universe mind, but like mind in general. That story is just connected to mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it would have to be, because story explicitly and implicitly contains data and information and design and intent, like you were saying before.
Correct, yeah.
And in order to contain those kind of things, I don't know of any instance, even if I were to try to tell a story to myself and imagine it, I can't think of any instance in which something that didn't come from a mind contains those things, one of them or all of them. Right. Like, and that's why I think why it's so compelling for people when they finally learn about things like DNA and say, wow, this is like the craziest thing. It's got more data than any library that I've ever heard of. And there it is. Your cells use it. And they don't. How is this even possible that your cells use and contain data?
Right. Would you say that, you know, these story elements that we see in reality is sort of a pointer to like reality being fundamentally like mental in nature?
I don't know about reality being fundamentally.
Well, you know, these story elements we see in the world and how it maps on to mind, that mind is sort of fundamental in a sense.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree with that. I would say
Okay.
the first thing that we encounter in reality is hardly ever matter. It's always meaning and purpose. Those are the first things that we interact with in reality.
I think that's significant.
And from there, we can abstract out mathematical formulae and then like interact with and manipulate matter. But that's after we've understood purpose and meaning and even involved ourselves with intent. And then we begin to interact with that matter. And so, yeah, I think that's the first thing that the universe is made of, is meaning.
I would say certainly our experience of the world is fundamentally that sense of mind. So like,
that's a good clarification.
Yeah, because like our prefrontal cortex is like our governor module, more or less. Like it's the part of our brain that develops last, by the way, but it also is the part of our brain that is designed to kind of create narrative, to understand sequence, to understand how cause and effect are related to each other, to kind of be able to delay gratification and project into the future and consider like, if I do this, here's what will happen based off of, you know, prior data. And so like essentially what that prefrontal cortex is doing is activating a sense of self in the world. It's and that idea of the me, of who I am, is essentially what we would call like our mind, or and so that sense of self is what we carry with us as we interact with everyday people. So for example, like in my counseling practice, I encounter a lot of people who have trouble in relationships or in other social settings because they're like I said before, like hypersensitive, hyper aware, like highly tuned. Certain signals become what we call like super salient. They become very, very important because of their past history of trauma, because of their experience, whatever. And that the whole reason why that happened is because the experience is hardwired into their brain. You must pay attention to this stuff. This is survival level seriousness. And so as a result, they expend a lot of resources into that. And that all gets wrapped up in their sense of who they are as a person. Like, can I handle these things or not? Do I need to fight really hard, or can I kind of take it at a little bit lower level? And so all of those sort of sense, that sense of self, that sense of myself in the world, that sense of my place in the world, which is all narrative, all story based, is highly dependent on like on the way in which we experience the world. And so yes, at its most fun, I mean, like at a purely materialist, which I absolutely, that's the whole point of here, is that that's not the foundational level of reality. But at a purely
Right.
materialist layer,
Yeah.
that absolutely is exactly how we experience the world, and that creates the core functionality of how we operate as human beings.
So then, if that's the case, would you say that it's well? No, hold on. Let me rephrase that. I'll go back because I feel like I'm skipping a step. I was mentioning before that there are that John Vervaeke's proposed 4 different styles, 4 different
Right.
kinds
Uh-huh.
of knowing. Right. One that we've been talking about with infants is procedural knowing. Right. The swaying motion of the mother. Right. It's almost like the first thing that a baby learns is how to dance with mom. Right.
Uh-huh.
And the mom doesn't really need to necessarily learn how to dance with baby. Her body performs this almost like on the house, right?
Sure.
And it would kind of have to, because without that intuition and guidance to foster that immediate relationship with the baby, you don't get things like the immediate affection that the baby needs, the warmth of its body, that skin to skin contact, breastfeeding for good, like there's a lot that rides on the first few moments that you exit the womb.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is riding on that, and so if you don't get that first latch for the breastfeeding, it is exceedingly difficult to get a second latch. It is even more difficult to get a third and a fourth, and very quickly a baby will metabolize itself to death without that. Thankfully, we live in the modern world and we have things like formula and things like that. We have feeding syringes. There's other methodology that we've used to supplement that need, which is cool. But let's say 100 to 250 years ago, we would have had no such supplement, right? Oh, cool. All right, Spencer has a graphic up here.
Yeah,
So
just
we have
perfect. Yeah.
the 4 kinds of knowing here as listed is propositional, knowing that something, right? Abstracted facts, ideas, and concepts. This is our articulated verbal or linguistic kind of understanding, right? Where I can articulate a proposition out of the thing, right? Procedural is to know how. This is, as we said before, embodied, and it's embedded emotionally, and you act it out. This is something that you will do. It's something that we often refer to in a kind of comical sense as muscle memory, as though your muscles were the thing that had the memory necessarily, but your brain does, through your nerves, extend to your entire body. So let that sink in for a second. And then you have perspectival knowing from, and that's locational. It's a specific point of view, a here and nowness. This is the like we were saying, the experience of something as you're experiencing it right now and here in space and time. It's the right nowness of something, let's say, which is really helpful because it keeps you in a place where you can be, in some real sense, goal oriented with the others, right? And so the last one is, I think, what I would consider the highest form of knowing, which is participatory, which is being known and knowing, dynamic reciprocity of relationships. This is let's say, the standpoint by which I would say we get the clearest expression of the importance of the image of God, our communion with one another, our communion with God as a person, to know and be known. This is the basis for our faith, ultimately, in a kind of articulated way, is actually the combination of all 4 of these categories kind of encapsulates what we would mean by being a Christian in any real worthwhile sense, right? And so I think that, and thank you, Spencer, that's a really helpful graphic. I'll have to save that. The way that this kind of plays out in the conversation we're having now is that we've kind of covered, we almost opened with procedural knowing as opposed to propositional knowing, right? Which is not articulate, not verbal, that kind of thing, but embodied. I know with my body, I can feel it, right? And it's like, and this is cool because I'm a musician. I know Chase is a musician. I don't know if you guys are musicians, but when you're playing music, a lot of it is repetitious muscle movement and technique, but some of it is also something that is embodied, which is a feeling, especially improvisational music, where you're reacting and responding right now in that perspectival way. I'm reacting and responding. I play drums in the worship group at my church, and it is a very rare occasion where the moons collide and we practice. We never practice. right? Prudence asked what instruments we play. I play drums and guitar and bass and a little bit of keys, and I like to sing, but mostly drums. I would say I'm a drummer. I believe Chase is a guitarist. I don't know if he plays anything else. Do you play anything else, Chase?
Not really. I just play guitar. See, my guitar sitting right over there, but yeah, that's about all I play.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Travis said no. Spencer, do you play any instruments?
I'm terrible.
Are we going to count the obligatory acoustic guitar that every male played in high school?
if you still remember how functionally to perform those things, then yes.
Functionally, yes, I do. I don't have the fingertips to be able to do that anymore. But yes.
Fair enough. Yeah, though that's a very relevant thing. I'm not gonna lie. My hands have taken a beating over the years from my job specifically. Dale, do you play any instruments? I don't think I've ever asked you that.
I do not. The last time I played an instrument was the trumpet in grade 7 music class, and all I knew was play hot cross buns, and I don't remember. I will relearn.
Okay, fair enough.
Next Cosmic Corner.
So okay, fair enough. Well, it's one of those things where honestly to learn and be able to do something like that, music is another one of those things that I think, to be honest with you, if there was anything in reality that I would say is closest to what I consider magic, it would be something like music. Music is something very strange, right?
Wouldn't you say
another one of those things?
Wouldn't you say there's usually, I mean, not always, but it has to be like a raw talent,
Well, in some senses, yeah. I mean, everybody has an aptitude of some kind, but it's like people who are less coordinated can still learn how to walk and run. They just take a bit longer, There is some assistance in raw talent, but to be honest with you, cultivating raw talent is a lot more important than actually being born with it. And there are a lot of people who are born talented who stay lazy and don't develop because they're naturally talented and they don't pursue. Those people who don't have the natural talent learn to pursue, and it makes them better in the long run. And so there's an advantage to being terrible and then working hard, and there's an advantage to being good naturally and working
I guess I got a shot then.
Yeah, I'd say so. I honestly, I would encourage you to
yeah.
try it out, dude. It's really worthwhile. Even if you never get to any kind of professional level or anything like that, it's honestly therapeutic in some real sense also to be able to just sit down and play around with sounds and do something that is deeply your own.
Yeah, because when I do something, like I really do it, like I go get into it like really heavily when I do something. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you can stay devoted, it's an investment. The time spent is what you get in your return.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you guys, because for me, I've never been kind of musically inclined in terms of creating music and stuff like that. Do you guys see that there's a difference or benefits that people get from just like listening to music or liking music as a spectator versus actually participating in it and creating music or something like that? Is there a difference? Do you guys notice?
Absolutely. There is an entire branch of psychology and counseling and therapy dedicated to the use of music, both creatively to create as well as to receive. And honestly, right now in the psychology world, the best work that's being done in terms of recovery from trauma and trauma modalities to be able to work with people who have experienced some like really serious stuff is highly nonverbal, either like somatic psychotherapy, that's a lot of what I do, or experiential modalities like internal family systems, which is another one I do, or like play therapy or sand tray, which are like projective nonverbal type of things, or at least have a high nonverbal component. But then also art and music therapy is utilized very often in those spheres as in themselves healing, because they rewire the brain in very specific ways that help to create wow, there's a whole rabbit trail I could go down. But anyway, the point is they're very effective.
And what's cool too is I can attest to what you're talking about, Dale, in an experiential way myself, because when I was a kid, I wasn't born with an affinity for being good at anything like rhythm or melody, and I didn't sing very well. I had a really weird nasally kind of sound to my voice, and I didn't know how to use my throat to open and close. I couldn't control a vibe. I couldn't do anything intuitively. But I grew up in a family that was very musical. My mom can sing really well. All of her brothers and sisters could sing really well. My grandmother could sing really well. My grandfather taught all of his kids how to harmonize on the stair steps in San Francisco because they didn't have TVs and stuff back then. Well, at least they had TVs, but that my family didn't own one. And my sister can sing like a pop star. She's amazing. And so it wasn't until I was well into my teens, late teens, 16, 17, that I started to actually do anything musical. And it took me taking up the gauntlet of trying something musical out for me to actually even hear music as such, rather than just the song as the song. It was the instruments participating in the song, right? I can sit down and I can listen to an entire track that I've literally never heard before and only listen to the drums as I listen. I can only listen to the bass as I listen. I can only listen to the vocals as I listen. I can dissectively in my ear actively listen and dissect the song as it's playing out and understand it. And because it's like a language, music is, it's like a language, I can articulate in my own understanding what it is they're doing and then translate it to myself so that I can perform it myself. I can recreate it myself, especially with the drums. I'm a lot better with the drums than I am with the other instruments. But even with the guitar, most genres of music, I can kind of hear it out, pick out the key, and kind of play with the notes until I find it. And it's more of an aha than it is like a knowing. But with the drums, I can hear it and know it like right away. Like I recognize it right away, like the language that it is. And so when I get to a place where I can play it, right? And then that's where, things like writing music comes into play too. I can't write or read music at all. And so all of my musical understanding and linguistics are all nonverbal in that way. And that kind of maps on for me also, because it's like a public speaker who couldn't read. I can't even imagine such a person, but if there were such a person, right, who was a public speaker, who was a successful orator, who had never learned to read or write, they just knew the language, right? That's kind of what music is to somebody who just learns the music and the instrument and then functionally learns it like a language and plays around with it. And you do it in a communal setting often. That's what a band is. When you're a teenager, you form a band with your silly friends in your garage and you play around with it and you see what you can do. And you have to play. You can't just like sit down all serious and make a song happen. Like you're going to find most of it on accident. And those happy accidents and the human element that's in there is actually what makes unique and good music most of the time, is actually the human element of idiosyncrasy and difference and things like that. And so all of those things kind of come into play. But unfortunately, in some real sense, as a musician, after I learned the language, the mystifying awe of hearing a song and not knowing what was happening disappeared entirely, and it was replaced by an intimate knowing in a different way. And so it's kind of difficult to say like exactly one way or another, but it is something where it kind of demystifies itself as you learn and becomes mystifying in a completely different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way in terms of music. I don't really read music, but like whenever I'm making a song, I will like, I'll be messing around with it, and I'll hit a note and I go, that's not what I was looking for. Like that's not communicating the kind of mood or the thing that I want to communicate with it, and so I will just continue to play around with it. But the whole idea is that I'm intentionally making something that I want to communicate to people on a different level than just because like my music's all instrumental anyway. But I'm working on like a heavy metal album right now. Josh, you've heard some of it, and the whole purpose of it is kind of because I love astronomy and I love looking up at space at night, and just thinking about just all of creation, and God creating the universe and everything like that. Just I think about it like it's like just this great, huge piece of art in that the universe is, you know, that God has made. And so I want to communicate that passion, that love for that kind of thing through music. And so I've been working on this album. It's just kind of like, it's got a lot of, you might say, spacey elements to it. You know, the idea is I want you to kind of be stargazing as you're listening to it, you know, like, you know, you're jamming out obviously, but you're also stargazing at the same time, you know. And I had a friend listen to one of the songs, you know, and he said what he liked was the very what was the word he used? He didn't say he's transcendent kind of sound to it. It's I guess kind of had like a bit of a celestial sort of sound, but that was something I worked towards, you know, because it was what I wanted to communicate. Without, like we've been talking about, just simply saying it, but like you kind of, it puts you in that mood. It kind of puts you in that place where, like, you know, you're just up in the heavens, kind of thing like that. And, you know, it's just very very interesting thing to think about, you know, the way music is a form of language, you know, when you're listening to it, even when you're listening to it, you know, and it is different when you create it, you know, as opposed to listening to it. Like you were saying, I pay attention now to a lot of the specific instruments that are going on. Sometimes I don't need to listen to the lyrics. I'm listening to the riffs or something like that, you know, and but it has it's a very fascinating form of communication. The music is, you know, and I remember going through a lot of depression. I didn't think about this at the time, but going through a lot of depression, I was attracted to a lot of depressing music. And then, you know, nowadays I'm more attracted to very, a little bit more upbeat kind of stuff, you know, and I intentionally listen to that because it helps me with my own, you know, mental struggles and stuff like that, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's a very, very cool thing to think about. It's what I love music so much.
And I think it's so interesting because I see that all the time with my clients where, you know, they're struggling with depression, and we talk about using music, and of course, both ends of the extreme don't always help. Where there's the, you know, like just super poppy positive stuff,
yeah,
or, you know, super, you know, depressing, you know, going further deeper in the spiral stuff. And so what we try to do is we try to find something that still speaks to both sides of themselves almost. Like, you know, like for example, it might be tone and rhythm and mood in the music that kind of speaks to that ennui, so to speak, of the depressive experience, but then maybe lyrics that speak to a different aspect of that, or maybe it has like a bridge section that kind of picks up in a different way. And it's so fascinating because I've seen this happen like in session where we're listening to music in session, and I can see clients' body language shift. Like they sit differently, they breathe differently, they move a slightly different way. Now it's not, you know, massively obvious all the time, but especially for someone who's trained to pay attention to that, that is something that I notice. And I usually call it, I'm like, I notice you shifted your body a little bit. I notice you moved a little differently, or your breathing pattern has shifted. Can you tell me about that? Can you tell me how you feel now? And so trying to kind of get them, like, that's one of the ways in which we use music to help heal. So
interesting. Okay, cool. I have a follow-up. Is that okay, Josh, or are we running out of time? Or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I just want to kind of get your guys' take on, okay, so music within a church setting, because I think that the Bible is pretty clear. This is an essential aspect of the worship service. The vast majority of human beings like it and enjoy it and stuff like that, and feel in communion with, in fellowship with each other as they worship God through that means and stuff. Now, there are some Christians, and I'll admit, growing up, I was kind of resistant to singing and stuff like that. Just for me personally, I thought it was cool for others to do it, but for me, it almost felt like it was kind of like brainwashing in a way, or like mind, you know, like I kind of associated that with like not a true intellectual faith, like knowing God and wanting to worship God or something. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I was falsely kind of associated as I grew up.
You know,
and so I just wanted to get from you guys, Is that a correct biblical view? Is involving music for everyone? Like, will everyone benefit universally, or is it okay for some people not to sing in worshiping God?
Well, I guess as I think about it, so I'm Eastern Orthodox, so we don't have the instruments, but we do a lot of chanting. And as a matter of fact, the whole service is chanted, like even the biblical reading. The only thing that's not chanted is like the 15 to 20-minute sermon. So it's basically
Ritualistic is what I.
yeah, it's all chanted. But I got to tell you, I have never sensed a greater like feeling of being indwelt with the Holy Spirit than when I hear like the Beatitudes being chanted. I mean, I think it's beautiful. In fact, I can't sing. Like, I'm terrible, but I mean, I sing anyway at church because I feel led to. To me, I think it's one way of like really kind of coming into union with God through music. So yeah.
and union with everybody else as well. Like that's one of the
sure. Yeah.
attractions of Eastern Orth. I mean, even though I'm in a Protestant communion, that's one of the attractions of Eastern Orthodoxy for me is just that communal experience of everybody being there, singing the same thing, worshiping together. But then on top of that too, also like the historical communion of the saints, because there's a lot of ancient weight behind a lot of these, more Eastern practices that kind of give you a sense of like, stepping outside of Chronos time and going into Kairos time.
I like
and
that.
being present with, all all the faithful.
So. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And it's also the case that singing in a corporate setting is ancient and predates even, let's say, that the incarnation by a long stretch, right?
Right. It was a Jewish practice, wasn't it? Like ancient Jewish.
Well, yeah. I was going to say it's not uncommon for the prayers to be sing-songy, kind of like, and some languages themselves, like I believe Swedish itself is kind of, if you listen, I think it sounds like, if you listen to somebody who's speaking Swedish, it's a very melodic sounding language because of the way the words are pronounced. Like some languages are developed from that tonality, that vocal skill, right? And so the language as an articulate thing, I think, is also something that is developed out of something more musical than not, right? Like if I'm asking you a question, how do you know I'm asking you a question? Usually it's because I'm asking, right? That very melodic.
Sure. Yeah.
But if I'm making a statement and I'm doing it with confidence, I'm going to go down. This is something that's unique to verbal language in some sense, is that we use words to communicate, but we also use tone to communicate. If I used nonsense words, you could still tell if I was asking a question or making a statement, right? And it's because of that tonality. It is very musical, and you do understand it, right? And good speakers, good public speakers will use that to their advantage for sure. Right? That's something that's going to be of great utility to you. If you want to keep people captivated, you want to have a good vocal cadence, which means you can't be speaking so constantly that people can't keep up, that you're not breathing properly, that you don't give time for the pieces that you're saying to land for someone. You give a moment, they catch up, you give another moment, you keep speaking, then you give a moment. And that cadence allows for the communication to be that much more effective. And that's timing, that's melody, it's cadence. Those are all musical terms, right? And so those are all things that are going to be deeply embedded in why music would be something that can even be worshipful, right? Is because it is communicative, it is relational, it is corporate in a lot of senses. But it's also something that's deeply tied into ritual. Like even in tribal societies that don't have, like super articulate semantic languages, they do have very, very complex dance patterns, drumming patterns, musical systems, chanting patterns. Sometimes they use, costumes and masks and things to create rituals that are all, again, narrative oriented, that they're all participating in that narrative contextually with one another. And this is something that is just so ancient. I can't even think of a humanity that doesn't do something like that. You know what I mean? It's natural that when music plays and it has a dancey beat, which is a kind of, a 4/4 on the floor where you get this,
right,
You want to bob your head. You want to do this. Play that for a baby. 5 seconds, they're going to be bouncing and dancing. You don't even have to tell them. You don't have to ask them.
Yeah.
Right?
I would say that we were designed. It's almost like we were designed to develop that. The way the laws of nature unfolded, and that God was sort of designing the process of He wanted agents like us who could communicate with this.
Exactly. And it's not like God isn't terribly musical also. Look at nature, for goodness sake. All of our inspiration for music came from 2 instruments. That's where instruments came from, right? And where did we learn to tone the vocal instrument? It was from things like wind. And we use wood to communicate wind back into notes. We call them woodwind instruments, right? We use flutes and clarinets because air flowing through the trees sounded terribly musical. Birds are very musical. Water can be very musical. The movement of a horse walking can be very musical. It's where blues came from. All of these things are actually rooted in nature. They really are. And I believe, because I'm obviously a theist and a Christian, I do believe nature is designed. And it would be inherently obvious to somebody who affirms creation, but also affirms the image of God as the pinnacle of creation, to say we would have that communion with nature as well. It would have to be natural. It would have to be on the house in some sense.
Right.
Well, it just sounds like Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies proclaim the work of His hands. And it also sounds like Romans 1 too, that Paul says, you can look around and at all creation, and it reveals God's glory, and it reveals not just like, I think there's a tendency, and I kind of heard this somewhat in the background of your question, Dale. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but like almost like a dichotomy between like logic and emotion, of like, we've got the propositional stuff, like the information, the content, and then there's the emotionality of a song, for example. And I know, like, for me in Protestant world, like that's one of the things that there's a bit of a suspicion around, of like, we can't trust emotions will lie to you, and emotions are like they're kind of viewed with like a side eye at best. And I think honestly, like the universality of tribal cultures and music and just these very emotive experiences tells us that if we isolate that part of ourselves, then we're kind of almost becoming, in some sense, less human. And the fully orbed human experience is both.
Spencer, thinking about that, I can't help but think that part of the Protestant suspicion is because of what some let's say over fundamentalists, they will rely solely on emotion and just ignore logic.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
But you don't want to go to the other extreme where it's all logical proposition. So you want to have some, and so I can see how the suspicion kind of arose, because when you got some just
Pentecostals and the Presbyterians.
When you got somebody just outright denying logic,
I think this started from when I was. This kind of started when I was a kid, though, too. So like it wasn't like well thought out of like, okay, Protestant theology is this, but I did have sort of these associations where I was associating sort of ritualistic or communal activities as being, I said mindless, but I guess ritualistic means sincere, I guess, is how I kind of saw it. So I avoided that stuff or whatever, right? But I realized that that's wrong, right? And most people benefit from this. It's commanded in the Bible for believers to do. So I wanted to see, look, is this good for all Christians? Are there exceptions where some Christians can't or don't have to participate in this, or is this good for everybody? And put your false associations aside and just enjoy it's both and type.
I like the both and view, where you have this propositional, because I love philosophy, so I'm very much into that, but also the experiential, the emotive and so forth. And I think where you really run into trouble is when you overemphasize one and kind of deny the other, like Spence and I were talking about. So I think it just comes down to having a healthy perspective of both.
Balance, I think you guys are right. I was wrong growing up, and but I still do have those remnants where I've got that thing
in the same way.
wrong, but it's there, right? So I I'm taking baby steps. I sing in my heart, kind of thing, and then eventually I'll start singing out loud and stuff like that. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah.
I think a lot of that is also tied to the same fear that people have of public speaking, right? Where it's not like you can't speak. You can speak within yourself, and even if you're in front of people, you can often have an internal dialogue. But introverts tend to get lost in that internal dialogue, as a matter of fact, which makes them even more likely to be terrified of speaking in front of people because they stumble inside, let alone outside. Right. And so there is a difficulty in that. It's not like it's all that easy to open yourself up because it is so deeply communicative, right? Especially because emotions are involved. And that's why a lot of the time people are suspicious of music also, is that it is deeply capable of manipulation of your emotions, right? People have a reason to be suspicious of manipulation of their emotions because their emotions can be fooled. Even if their emotions don't know how to lie, your emotions will always tell you the truth. They're the only part of you that don't know how to BS you, right? But at the same time, your emotions can be misled, just like your rationality can be misled and you can be deceived. But you can also rationalize a lie for yourself, and you can use your rationality to lie. You cannot use your emotions to lie. Your emotions don't know how to do that, but they can be fooled just like your rationality. So in some senses, there's advantages to being able to be emotionally intelligent, right? Yeah. But at the same time, knowing that music is capable, like I said, it's rather like a magic. It's capable of that deeply manipulative power, right? To the point where if the violin swells at just the right moment in a movie, you'll have a tear. It'll rise. Why do you think music is in the background of movies? It's not in the background of real life most of the time, and yet here you are intuitively watching, and the music informs the scene enough that you're more in it than you were before. So music is encapsulating, it's engrossing, and it's deeply capable of manipulation, which is why cults often use music as well. And it's not like cults can't misuse music. Some cult leaders are musicians, right? Really capable and skillful musicians, and they use that as a tool for manipulation, right? A lot of people right now, especially in the Christian world, are having, let's say, cautionary tales for themselves about whether or not we should be using music from churches with whom we have doctrinal disagreements, or we should be only using music that we get from people who have the exact same doctrine as us, right? And so that divide also is very suspect for people, right? And so the difficulty is, we know that music is a deeply powerful emotive experience. And that's why it's suspicious, because we are fully aware that our emotions can be manipulated, right? Travis said he has to get out of here. You guys, you want to say anything before you hop off, bud?
Not too much. This is like an area I'm incredibly well read on, but I found this conversation like really fascinating, and there's just so much to explore. I've really enjoyed it, and I really like the thing with music and like even how we relate to God. I think this story narrative and there's a lot here. So I really enjoy it. I will come back and catch what I missed later, and so I just wanted to say thanks and God bless.
Right on. Thanks for coming.
God bless. Yeah.
But
Josh.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna ping off of what you were saying, or what you popped up there from the chat.
Which one? This one?
No. The emotions don't know how to lie. Yeah. One of the things that I talk to my clients all the time about is how emotions are information. Because I think a lot of times people try to kind of look at that and say, like, there's positive emotions or negative emotions, and we have to, and they kind of like get this like pre-assigned valence of like, anger is a bad emotion, or sadness is a bad emotion, or something like that. And or even something like guilt, and so I look at that, and a lot of times with my clients, we say, okay, well, this emotion is communicating something to you,
right?
And it's communicating something very deep, very atavistic, very personal to you, and so we're better off listening to it and learning from it. It doesn't mean that everything it's telling you is 100% it is 100% worthwhile. Let's put it that way. It is always correct from a certain perspective. There's that kind of perspectival knowing, operating in there, which kind of connects very much to like that Greek idea of doxa, or like just kind of like a common opinion. So it's very from a certain perspective, it always is true. But it's valuable to kind of bring in your whole, all the different parts of you, all the different emotions, and kind of listen to them all. And so we use that image a lot of times of like sitting down at the conference table with like all these different parts of you, or like, I love the movie Inside Out. And I'm so excited that the second one's, yep, there it is right there. Yep. And the second, I'm so excited the second one's coming out in June. So, but yeah, it's that image of like having all parts of you or all emotions, kind of sitting down at a table and like hearing each one of them out, because they all have important and valuable information to share. Not, they all have different perspectives, and not everyone has the quote unquote right perspective on that. But you're right. Like they can't like lie, because they're in a different part of our brain than our prefrontal cortex is. And yes, there are connections between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, like the hypothalamus and stuff like that. But those are not, it's not like that portion of our brain feels in the same sense. It doesn't generate emotions in that same sense. Those are very hormonal, chemical, biochemical reactions.
Instinction-based things, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And it's still worth listening to, regardless. Even if at the end of the day you say, this doesn't align with my core values, who I am as a person or who I want to be as a person. And so I'm going to need to say no to this thing this emotion is telling me to do. But it doesn't mean I'm saying no completely. It means I take that information in and I say, not in this way, not right now, not with this person, whatever. So,
which demonstrates also that your rationality and even your conscious faculties are in some sense residing above or over. They're ruling over the emotions, and the emotions. Let's say it'd be like a ship on the sea, right? Emotions are kind of the containment that your rationality is sitting in, which is why you have that basis for your emotions informing your perspective, right? But also your perspective can inform your emotions. It's not a one for one, right? And so there's kind of an interesting back and forth relationship even within yourself, where you communicate to your body and your body communicates to you. So there's that also. But we have a question in the side chat from my buddy Sean that I think is real. Oh, sorry, Dale, what'd you say?
Okay, just very, very quickly, just on the emotions.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Can I agree more or less with what you and Spencer were saying. Like I take the view, and I took a course on the philosophy of emotions, and I take the perspective that it's an attitude or a disposition. That's what emotions are, right? So they can have correctness conditions. It could be correct to be just to have an attitude or not, but in and of themselves, emotions aren't lying. They're not true or false. You're having that emotion. But because, as Josh was saying, they are integrated with our cognitive faculties, and on that front, emotions can and often do produce false or deceitful beliefs in response to those emotions. So, like just be careful, right? There's a reason there's a fallacy appeal to emotions, but the emotions themselves are not lying or something like that.
Yeah, fair enough. And I agree. I think that was kind of the nuance I was trying to say, is that your emotions themselves can't lie. They can just be misinformed. They will tell you what they have to say, and that's all. They won't, like, if anything, they'll over tell you, but they can't lie. They can't come up with an articulate proposition for you. You do that based in your emotions, and your emotions are based in those propositions as well, because like I said, you're informing your body as much as well, maybe not as much, but as well as your body is informing you, right? But your emotions aren't infallible any more than your conscience is infallible. These all develop with you, and they're all contextual. They're all situational. This is all back to that perspectival right nowness perception of knowing. That's where that comes back to, is I'm knowing something perspectively. My emotions are a deeply rooted part of that, because they're contextual also. They're right now. But the weird thing about emotions is they don't know anything about the passage of time. Your emotions will recur when the same stimulus comes back. And if it's a trauma or if it's a delight, oftentimes you'll have the exact same measure of emotion as you did the first time that it happened, as though right now is the first time that it happened, which is why PTSD is even capable of being a thing, right? That's the kind of thing where this is it, the rubber really meets the road in that sense. Is PTSD is a reaction often to things that are not external threat in the way that we perceive them to be, right? But that doesn't mean that your emotions aren't telling you exactly what they have for you, right? They're just over or misinformed by something because they're part of the eternal part of you that meets your body. They don't know about the passage of time. They don't understand, and they can't lie to you. So they're just going to tell you, and they're not going to wait. They're not going to ask questions. They're just going to throw it at you. And then you're going to have to be able to sort yourself above those things and come outside of them in some sense to be able to actively consider them rather than merely reacting to respond. We went over that in a previous episode with Spencer's whiteboard.
Good old whiteboard, yeah.
And that was one of the cooler things, I think, is getting into that understanding of that progression from one thing to another, and how it's a feedback loop. It's self-sustaining and cyclical in some real sense, right? Where your emotions are informed by your experiences and your experiences are informed by your emotions. And there can't be this stark separation. Oftentimes people pretend like, they say things like facts don't care about your feelings. That's cool, but we're not
or like
robots.
pure
So
reason.
that's not really. Yeah, it's like you're not going to have a world in which that's really going to fly anywhere except the fancy of high-fiving your friends and neighbors when you make a cool point. But really, like, you're not talking to a robot unless you're talking to Chat GPT, in which case you could say facts don't care about your feelings. Well, guess what? It don't have any, so it won't matter. But unfortunately, my feelings care about the facts pretty regularly, and they help me sort through which facts are relevant to me. And so those are the things that actually are the underbelly of why some of these things are deeply important to how we communicate even verbally, because these are the backdrop of some of those things, So it's that you're exactly right, Dale. It's not you're not getting an infallible witness from your emotions, but you're getting a deeply and impossibly honest one. That at least is the case, right? And so you can trust that your emotions are telling you the truth, but you can't trust that they're well informed, right? So that's why it's the case where you have to consider them. This is why the scripture says, take every thought captive, right? It's not necessarily like you take all of the negative thoughts captive. No, you have to take your manically positive ones captive as well, or you get impulsive, So you have to be responsive to all of those emotions in their context as they happen. But Sean here has a really interesting question that I didn't think about, that I kind of like. He said, is emotion one of our senses? The way that it can be fooled, but isn't capable of I would say lying. It's capable of deceiving in some sense, but not willfully in that articulate way, right? So it reminds me of the five senses. Like, your sight can be deceived, but you see what you see, right? Is it possible that emotion is like an internal looking sense? I'll leave that to Spencer. What do you think about that, man? That's a really interesting question.
There's this concept that I utilize a lot in somatic psychotherapy called interoception. It means like looking inward, and it's paying special attention to. So instead of perception, which is kind of looking outward at the world around me, interoception goes, I need to look at how, like, for instance, listen to my heartbeat, or notice my breathing, or those kinds of things. And when we do that, when my clients develop a highly tuned interoceptive sense, the internal looking at how my body is reacting, they notice that A, they get more control over their body reactions, and B, that then creates either, again, I'm not sure if this is a cause or an effect, chicken and egg, but it subsequent or coextensive with that occurs a change in their emotional state, where they notice, okay, my heart rate is slowing down just by paying attention to it. And wow, okay, I notice I feel like my anxiety went from like an 8 to a 6, or maybe like a 5. Interesting. And so, yeah, there is very much a sense component to emotions. I don't know that I would quite call it emotion being one of our senses, but by tuning our interoceptive sense, that ability to turn the noose, turn the mind inward, and not thinking about our thoughts, but thinking about our body, our self, our embodied reality. It does have a direct effect on our emotional states.
I feel like this is relevant to you also, Chase. This is kind of what you were describing in the showing of the person by their responses and their body language and being able to put that into a description. This is kind of do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Is this also, or am I following? This is what you were talking about, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I also want to just say real quickly, on the point that we've been talking about, when I was looking for tips on how to, when you're talking about the facts don't care about your feelings thing and all stuff like that, the logic, super logical stuff. What I learned about opening chapters in your novel is what you need to do is you need to get your audience or your reader to connect with the main character. And you're never going to do that by some just pure logical thing. It's always an emotional connection to the character. So there has to be some form of an emotional connection that, and that just goes to talk about, like that, how our emotions are very, very important to who we are. And so that was a really fascinating thing for me. But yeah, you're very right. Depending on how each character reacts to this information or that information, it speaks to who they are, and what's beneath, even what they may portray on the outside. It says much more than just an outward saying or an expression of some kind. That's what I've been learning, especially with myself too. Like I said, I've been getting very fascinated with psychology and the trauma and things like that, because I've been discovering my own sort of trauma that I've had been dealing. I was unaware of it. I've been thinking more introspectively about why I react to certain things in this way or in that way, and just being more and more aware of that. I think, and I'm going all over the place here. I apologize, but I think I was thinking about a situation of, this was months ago. We had a visitor at our church, and I thought, hey, she's kind of pretty, so I was like, I'm just going to go try and talk to her. I'm single, so I'm just going to go try and talk to her. And I started talking to her a little bit, and then it was pretty apparent, again, because I tend to look at body language, it was apparent that like after like maybe 5 minutes, she was pretty much done with this conversation. So, but afterwards, I'm driving home and I feel horrible. I feel terrible. I feel like, who am I? Like, I'm just this loser that nobody likes. I'm a freak. But then I stopped and I started thinking, that's, we all get rejection of some kind, that's part of life. I'm just reacting in a very, very irrational kind of way. Like that was a point where like my emotions were going a little bit too far. I was listening to it, but I was also I eventually recognized, I'm thinking too much into this thing. There's things like that just happen. It's fine. It's all good. And I just that was almost like a personal therapy session to myself.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. It was just paying attention to those emotions and recognizing when those emotions are good, or when they're, it's like, I'm not going to pay much attention to that, kind of thing like that. So, and it's the same thing I try to show in characters in my own novel writing. But it is absolutely essential, that the audience they're never really going to connect with somebody who is just, that's why even in like Star Trek with Spock, they want to explore his emotional side, like, like how he lacks that, like they try to give him some form of emotion, or just the fact that he lacks a little bit of emotion demonstrates like a character flaw in him that allows them to explore more and bring out the more emotional aspects of him, because it really is, at the end of the day, that we're much more interested in the emotional reaction of characters and that's how we get invested with these characters. And that's why that element of humanity is so incredibly important. And that's something that I've just been working on a lot, you know, in my like I said, my rewriting stuff, you know, trying to work on those things. My editor told me, you need to have a moment where your character kind of has this outburst of anger, you know, and just, but not, it can't just be like random. It has to be as a result of something that triggers something in them, you know? So that's what I did. And I worked on that kind of thing. And I would send it to my beta readers, and they, you know, they liked it. They really liked it a lot. They were really, really very, very interested in how it was going, and seeing that kind of a reaction from my main character because of something that somebody said to them, you know, and they just kind of, they go off, you know, and it has to do with their past, you know, and things like that, you know. So those things are very, very, very important. I would say absolutely important.
The emotion has to be connected to something the rationality is already familiar and relevant with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So yeah, my answer to Sean, it's off the screen now, but he's asking, look, are emotions some kind of a sense or something like that? And that's, yeah, is emotion one of our senses, right? And that's where I'm saying, coming in, and I think I'm disagreeing with the other panelists. I'm saying no, it's not. There are different views as to what an emotion is, right? So there's judgmentalism. Oh, it's an evaluational belief. Or William James back in the early days of the 20th century or something like that. He equated them to a body or a brain state or something like that. Then there's the perception, right? It's some kind of perception. That used to be the majority view, but it's now I kind of take what's called an attitudinal view. So emotions are attitudes or dispositions towards whatever we're reacting to, and I think that's what's the correct way to see it. And on that front, it does make sense to speak of attitudes being correct or not. There are correctness conditions. So I just want to, again, not waste too much time, but for the audience, if you guys are interested in learning about the different views, I did an interview with Dr. Michael Malona. He is an expert in the philosophy of emotions, and he goes over the different views, the pros and cons. As well, I'll post some of my papers from my grad seminar in the philosophy of emotions, so you can kind of learn what are these different views and what are the reasons for and against them, if that's helpful. So yeah.
Right on. Thank you for that. Cool. I'll have to check that out myself.
Just to kind of maybe bridge the gap there a little bit, Dale. For me, I look at how, and I'm not sure of all the nuances of that philosophical position, but when I think of emotions as attitudes or as like attitudinal perspectives on things, I mean, that experience does definitely shape the way in which we interact with like the raw stimuli that we encounter. And so it's, well, just like you were saying, Josh, it's not so much like I have a experience of something and then in a vacuum, I have an emotion. Really, like that emotion that I have is itself preconditioned on, or actually I would say it has a supervenience base of other emotions and other experiences that kind of creates a feedback loop. And so it's almost like it's an attitude that both reflects my previous experience but also creates my future experience at the same time. And so it does have an analog, to me at least, to the way in which, to our senses, in that it dictates how we encounter the world. And so just like some people have, different tastes, like for instance, my daughter hates spinach. I love it. But I haven't always. There have been times in my life where I hated spinach too. And I remember that largely was dictated by like almost like this sense of like you're not supposed to like spinach as a kid, like it's yucky green stuff. And so there was that kind of like cultural component that was dictating to me how I'm supposed to experience the world in this sense. And that then I created my own kind of superstructure that said, well, this is how I have to experience it. And then I disliked it for quite a while. And then after when I became an adult and could actually choose, and I was like, actually, I don't really care what other people think about what I eat. And so I started to actually like it. So again, there's that kind of feedback loop almost occurring where it's not an objective given. It's kind of like a subjective, feedback loop that's created there, which I think has an analog to our sensory experience. So
yeah, for sure. And for what it's worth, this is just in the philosophy of emotions from a philosophical standpoint. The majority view still is the perception view, so I think that's kind of the common sense.
Cool. Okay.
I'm the odd man out, I guess. With the what was that about tomatoes? What?
Oh, that was Carrie said, I thought I liked cherry tomatoes when I was little because they were adorable. Then I realized, I don't like these.
You can just leave, Carrie. Cherry tomatoes are awesome. I'm sorry.
My son will eat them like candy. It's nuts.
I know. I've got them in the fridge right now. So
I should have named him Denethor. Oh yeah. So I guess we have a follow-up question from Sean. He said, so a lot of therapy is interrupting that loop and forming new associations. Yes.
That is 100% it. I shorthand it as rewiring the brain.
Man, you know what, Sean, you should, that was a great way of wording that. That is exactly what it is. That therapy is an intentional and blessed interruption. That is what it is when it functions properly.
Right.
It is teaching your brain in some of the most first senses to learn to trust properly. And that trust as the investment that it is can have a proper return. And that teaches you how to interact with things again. Absolutely.
Yep.
Like and it's necessary too. Even if you don't go to a therapist, which to be honest with you, a lot of people would really benefit from going to a therapist and they talk themselves out of it because they think that it's stigmatized to, there must be something seriously wrong with me to need therapy. No, something being therapeutic is good.
Would you say those things are like defense mechanisms in their minds too? Like I can't go to therapy because of this, that, the other thing, blah, blah, blah.
Sure. Yeah. Along the same lines as what we were talking about earlier with Dale's suspicion of music as a form of manipulation. That's an intuition that's in the right direction. It is. People that know that trust is expensive is because they've been burned before. Duh. Trust is expensive. You should know that. And if you don't, you're naive and you will be burned, period. Trust is expensive. And that's why people who trust are not stupid. They're brave.
And that's a huge
difference.
And that's why, like, the best research we have about the efficacy of therapy is not about like whether they do cognitive behavioral therapy, which is trying to do, break up those loops, but in a very cognitive way, a very propositional way. It's not whether you do like I said, a more experiential or expressive form of therapy, like art or music therapy or sand tray or play therapy or IFS or any of those sort of things. The best research we have about what makes therapy effective is the relationship between the client and the therapist. So like what you were saying, Josh, about trust being expensive is absolutely correct. And so when you walk into a therapy session or you build a relationship with a therapist and you realize, and your whole neurobiological system realizes, oh my gosh, I actually trust this person. And oh my gosh, they haven't burned me. Like there's to create that safe space where it's okay to trust, which is why confidentiality is so important, which is why, all the ethics of the profession are so important. But, to create a safe space where it's okay to trust is highly, highly neurobiologically adaptive and beneficial because it rewires the brain to make trust, to swap the valence of trust off of negative. That's bad. That's dangerous. It'll hurt you. And on to positive. Okay, actually, or at least neutral, because we kind of have to progress there.
Yeah. I last couple of years, I've had a really dear friend of mine just disciple me. And I honestly think, he's not like officially a counselor, but it was a lot of counseling involved in it. Like he helped me out with just, he would just listen to me, everything I said to him, he would just sit with me for hours and we would just talk. And I would just, you know, at first I'm very like, I still got many walls up, you know, I'm not going to be like completely open with the guy. Over time though, you know, I was just able to really drop all that stuff. And it was funny because the first time we ever met, I was in my head, you know, my brain was like, don't go because this, the other thing, you know, what if this, what if that, and just all this really irrational thinking in my head. And I just went anyway. And I'm so glad I did. And he has really helped me, like that, like was said, just stop that loop, you know, of just that kind of thing. And begin to start asking myself questions about why I'm behaving this way, why I react to something this way or that way or whatever. And it's been very, very helpful for me in just learning more about myself and my emotions and why I would be the way, sometimes do the things I do. And I would say for everybody, you know, do something like that, you know, see a counselor, if you need to, or just at least just somebody who will listen to you and really help you, you know, not somebody who's just going to be like, you know, oh, you're great, you're wonderful, you're beautiful, or whatever, you know. It's like they want to help you, you know, they want to listen to you and they'll ask you questions and stuff, and you know, things like that. Like that's really, really a really, really good thing to do. It helps to stop that loop, you know, kind of thing.
Cool. I have, and I marked one of the comments in the side chat here, and I'm assuming they're asking to make sure that this is relevant to what we're talking about.
I know.
Image of God in the title. The title of this video is Universal Languages and the Image of God. All of this is relevant to the image of God, especially in the context of what we're talking about here, because let's say in what you just expressed about that discipleship, Chase, you learned not that your rationality was correct because it was going to these extremes. You said that was being irrational. Technically speaking, you thought that through and gave yourself reasons, right? It was using rationality to talk yourself out of doing something that would have been helpful. And so you can rationalize loads of things, right? What we need is the ability to trust, and trust is often staged by ourselves and by the situation and by all intuition and by all appearances to be something deeply irrational, right? And yet the fundamental basis for our faith is in fact a willful and participatory trust in God.
Yeah.
That is what we mean by having faith in God, and faith in Christ is not merely believing that God exists and that Christ is a real person in history, but giving him your trusting allegiance and living as though he is your God. He is that person to you. And he is personal, that you do know him, that he does know you, that he loves you, that he became man for you, that you trust him. Because in the Old Testament, he constantly makes an emphasis. Remember what I did for you in the desert when I pulled you out. Remember when this happened. Do you remember that I've proven myself to be worthy of trust? And then in the New Testament, it says, without faith, you will not please God. Okay, to please God requires you trust. And God's not a fool. He knows trust is expensive, but he knows himself and he's made himself known. And so because he's made himself known and we can know him, we can know and understand that he is trustworthy. He is worthy of trust, right? And why that's necessary is because we were made to image him. And when we falsely image him, we make him look untrustworthy. Okay. And when we image him properly, we display that trustworthiness to others. And when we do that, the kindness and goodness of God draws them into repentance. Thus, another image can be remade and reformed and restored to that unity with their maker, to perform that intended function, to be in that intended state, to receive that intended identity. And if you don't have those things and you're disintegrated, then you're going to feel disintegrated. You're going to experience reality as a disintegrated, chaotic mess. And what else would you experience it as when you don't trust, when you cannot trust? You've lost that feeling that trust is something that you could ever engage in again. And there are people who have been hurt real bad. And they are convinced that trust is foolish and they will not do it. And they live to and for themselves. And they're miserable. and they don't have to be, but they're convinced they have to be because they think that's the only thing that's safe. And the antidote to that is, in fact, learning to trust again. And one of the persons that you can learn to trust is God. And the way you do that is through his imagers, those people who follow him, the people that we call Christians, right? Not the people who call themselves Christians. Let me make that distinction, because anybody can call themselves that. Most politicians,
The ones who are little Christ.
Right, exactly. The ones who image God properly and are worthy of the name Christian by their fruit. Those people prove God trustworthy. And they are meant to do so. And they do so often without language. And because you've learned to trust them without language, they are being sent. And how will they hear if no one is sent? How will they believe if they have not heard? Our message and our gospel has been made articulate. It does require language in the ultimate sense, out loud. We are meant to proclaim the gospel. And so we will use language for that. But the precedent for that is, in fact, that I have made God on display as much as I have made God an articulate proposition for you, if not more so. Otherwise, why should you care what I'm talking about? Why should you care? Why am I relevant to you? Who am I? Seriously, what do I know? I don't know you. You don't know me. Why should you listen to me? But if I know God and I've put it on display, and I do this as much as possible, I love doing this in my job. There are people that I get to work around all the time in the rehab program and in the shelter who come to me later and are like, you have such a weird attitude and I don't understand you. And it's like, well, why? It's like, because you're not. Like, people do these things and they break things in the building and they disrespect you and they do this stuff, and you don't, like, how do you not just, and they want me, what they want me to do is rise up in anger and dignify myself and call them out on it, make a confrontation, make a physical form of myself, of confrontation, to bring about my will in the world, because that's how they think that things are done. And then they see me and I'm able to communicate with somebody who's covered in tattoos, has big bulging muscles, came out of prison, is trying to come off of drugs, doesn't know about anything except what they've experienced. And now they're learning to trust somebody again. And it's the guy that plunges the toilets and changes the light bulbs. Why is it that guy? Because his countenance is steady. That's why. Because you know what to expect from him. He's proven himself consistent over time. These people stay in this program for a whole year. Some of them, when they successfully complete the program, they've been there for 12 months. They know how I am. They see me 5 or more days a week for the whole day. They know how I am. So if I was a fake, they can pinpoint it, because believe me, they don't trust anybody. So they're looking for it, right? And so they get to a place where they can notice, and they will. And they'll call you out on it too. They have no censorship. They don't care. They don't care what you think anyway. They're going to tell you about yourself. And what I hear about myself sometimes is that that somebody doesn't like me, or that I'm a problem, or some other such thing, right? But other people will say, I can't believe how you react, or don't react, or some other thing, right? And say, I don't think that I could react that way. Well, maybe not in your present state, you couldn't, but with some remaking and with God's help, you absolutely could, because you could be a new creation when you submit yourself. You don't have to be how you are right now. You can be made new. That is the whole point of what we're doing here in this show in general, and in this show specifically, is trying to articulate those parts of how I share myself with you and you share yourself with me, that transcends even our ability to speak, right? And so I think that ability to share is one of those things that demarcates the importance of the image of God. And that's why I called the episode that is the universal languages and the image of God, is that image of God that we share as, I think, the basis for that shared communication and that shared reality, and my need and desire for you and your need and desire for me, and why that means that I can show you love because you're a self, and I can give selflessly because I am a self. And that shared selfness is something that we have reflected because we were made in God's image, the self, right? And so I think that's the basis where it all comes back down to that ground floor of where I share the sacred name with you. When I introduce myself, I use the words, I am Josh. Chase says, I am Chase. You introduce yourself with the divine name constantly, and you don't even have to think about it most of the time. But when you just stop to think about it, man, it is, you'll never get to the bottom of it. Seriously.
Yeah. I'll just say in closing that kind of what you were talking about. I truly learned, like, I've been a Christian for about 10 or so years, but it's been only the last couple of years that I really understood God's love for me. And one of the ways is because of this friend I was talking to you guys about. He showed, there's a lot of talking. We talk a lot, a lot of conversation between the two of us. But it was the fact that he showed up. He was always there. We would always meet. He would always find time for me. He calls me son, which really was it really struck a chord with me in a good way. But just that he was always there, and he helped me understand and know that I was loved. I was truly, truly loved. I didn't have to just know that in a theological sense or an intellectual sense, but that I'm really loved. Because if I have to look at all the things that God has done for me, the Lord has done for me, and including putting this guy in my life, he reaches out to me, wants to help me out, and there's the way God shows his love is more than just with words. It's with actions and people being there and showing that the love of God to you. And that is really big for me. And it allows me to do the same for others, to talk to friends of mine who are going through something and communicate a little bit of what I've learned from this other friend of mine to them, and just continue to just, spread that, see more image bearers understand themselves as being made in the image of God, and knowing that they are really, really loved. They are truly, truly loved. So that's probably my closing statement right there for our conversation. It's very, very, a very interesting, amazing thing to think about. Not just interesting, but just an incredible thing to contemplate.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to make it, bro. I really am.
Yeah.
Like I want to have you on for more of these, because I really appreciate that you're coming at this from a similar standpoint, but a very different one. You know what I mean? Like our interests have some overlap, but you're not me and I'm not you. And so I really that's one of the things. That's why I like Dale also, because Dale is coming from things and he's willing to say, I disagree. Let me ask you this, that's why I wanted Dale on here, is because he has a way of listening so carefully and gathering the point, right? And then using the point to form the next question. For me, that's indispensable, because again, what do I know? I want to learn what we're doing here. And for the people in the chat, we didn't come into this with an outline. None of us have notes in front of us. We're literally thinking live in front of us. And so that's what we want to be able to do with these discussions. And what I'm doing with Cosmic Corner is not only, putting my money where my mouth is and saying, thought is important, but expensive. It's risky, but it's worth it. Let me show you that it's worth it. I'll let you listen and critique me. I'll let you ask questions and all these kind of things. I think that it's worth it. And if I think that it's worth it, I should put my money where my mouth is and use that. And people like Dale, like Travis, who are deep thinkers, they're the people that kind of make this worthwhile too. So Dale, I'm really glad that you're here.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure to be a part of. I was joking with Josh. I was like, when he invited me on the Cosmic Corner, I'm just like, I've done podcasts for years now, since 2018, but his was one I was a little anxious about coming on, because some of the topics he talks about, it's different than my area of expertise and stuff like that. So am I going to have anything valuable to contribute and stuff like that? But I think this show was great. Yeah, like I said, I'm not afraid. Look, Christians, we have disagreements, we have agreements. Let's talk out the issues. And I was learning a lot from the answers that I got, because that's a genuine area. For example, with the music, that's a genuine area that I've struggled with. And even though it's rare, I've heard a few others talk about this experience, this kind of experience as well. So it was valuable to, well, why does God command us to sing, or another thing that didn't come up in this show, but I'm an introvert versus an extrovert. I think Josh briefly mentioned that, right? And well, fellowship just for extroverts? Is it for introverts? What's the value? So yeah, this was a great show. I hope I contributed something valuable. So yeah.
Well,
I think it would be cool to do a future episode on introversion and extroversion as a staging for intimacy and openness. Because I feel like those are the contrasts for why the church specifically as a body is good for both, right? It teaches the extrovert to be quiet for a moment and learn intimacy, and it teaches the introvert to open up and learn that trust and to push their attention external, because that's really the trap, right? Is for the extrovert, their trap is not to consider themselves. And the introvert's trap is to never stop considering themselves, right? Something like that. And so I think that would actually be a really cool future episode. I'm really pleased with how this conversation went. I am super blessed right now. Chase, I'm really glad that you're able to make it, bro. Anybody who's still listening right now, if you like what you're listening to, hit the like button on the video. If you like the content that we have here, Faith Unaltered has a lot of content. We have a lot of diverse topics, different shows. This is one of multiple shows. We have a Trinitarian apologetic show on Tuesday night with Dane Von Ace, which is the Three Crowns, and we have our regular show Faith Unaltered on Fridays. At least once a month we do an open mic night, and then we do a lot of cool theological discussions, debates, doctrinal discussions, studying scripture, textual criticism, things like that. We talk about all kinds of different things. And then Genesis marks the spot in the chat here is Carrie Griffel. She's got her own show that's going to be back up hopefully relatively soon for Pilgrims in a Holy Land. That's going to be really cool. We're always looking to expand and make something bigger and better. We want something like a network rather than a single show. And so far it's shaping up really nicely. So if you like that idea and that diversity, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. We have lots on here. There's lots of things. Go ahead and check out our playlist tab on the homepage. Cosmic Corner has its own playlist. I think this will be like my 18th or 17th video on there or something. It's really filling out. I've been doing this since last August, and this is an ongoing conversation. And so if you like what you're hearing here, go and check out some of the previous episodes. Leave your thoughts down in the comments. I do read them, and I do engage with them as much as I can. And I'm super blessed by everybody that reaches out and says something. And if you don't like the comment section on YouTube because it's a cesspool, I don't blame you. Look me up on Facebook. I'll add you on Facebook. You can send me a message and talk to me privately. I'm totally fine with that. I respect that privacy, and I don't think that anybody should have to engage on the YouTube comment cesspool if they don't want to. But if you want to leave your thoughts in the comments, please feel free to do so. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Dale's channel is called Real Seekers. Check that out. He's got his own stuff, a lot of philosophy, a lot of apologetics, a lot on the Shroud of Turin if you're interested in stuff like that. Really, really informative stuff. Dale's got a really good thing going, talks to a lot of professionals. He's very good at what he does. And I appreciate him. And also Spencer is a counselor, doesn't have his own channel, but he's been a pretty regular guy on here. And Travis, I don't think he has a channel, but he does write articles sometimes, and I'll see if I can get a link in the description later on for some of his writing and stuff. You guys want to check out more from Travis. But this has been awesome. I'm super blessed right now. Do you guys have any other closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I think I'm good.
Right on.
Yeah, I think, just I guess on my end, just as an announcement. So next week on my podcast, I will be in discussion with Dr. David Kimball Cook, who was a former Christian who's left the faith. And yeah, we're going to be talking about getting into the evidence for the empty tomb. So I've finally got Gary Habermas's new book, and where he's got about like 21 pieces of evidence proving the empty tomb. So we'll go for some of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that does sound awesome.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds like something that should be interesting to everybody who follows the Christ. I think
yes.
Right? We got one more question in the chat. What is the next conversation going to be on? You know, that's a good question. I have a couple of things rolling around in my head. It's probably going to be between the last two episodes that we did were on narrative themes for two different monsters, vampires and zombies. And I teased it a little bit in a previous episode, and I want to come back to it. I want to talk about perhaps how those two monsters match as an inversion or parody of the resurrection, and why both of them are also a parody or inversion of the Eucharist, that vampires eat blood and zombies eat the body and Christians eat both. That's one option. Or I could talk about themes and narrative patterns about heroic patterns and the hero himself or themself, herself, that kind of thing, where it's actually this textured, contextual thing, but those patterns exist as well. And the very hero and how the cross introduced self-sacrifice into the pattern of the hero. That's the other option that I'm aiming at. So if you guys want to do me a favor and leave your vote down in the comments of which one of those you'd rather hear next, that would be really helpful to me. But other than that, I really don't really have an option, or I don't have a decision quite yet. I think, they said the first, then the second. Fair enough. If I do it in order, that's fine with me. But everybody leave your thoughts down in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you like this video, share it. You know, get it out there on social media and let people think this is going to be a useful thing. If you know people that want their own private therapy session via video or whatever have you, that would be cool. I would appreciate that as well, because we're listener supported. If you'd like to support Faith Unaltered, go to our homepage. We have links in there for Venmo and stuff like that. And you know, I'm blessed for everybody that's listened this far, and I appreciate all of the support and the cool encouragement in the chat. You guys are awesome. I'm really pleased. I'm very happy, and I feel like this was a really great conversation, and I'm gonna have to go back to it multiple times. I'm really excited for how this ended up going. So with that being said, again, this has been Cosmic Corner, only on Faith Unaltered. Good night, God bless, and stay like Christ.